Hey everybody, it's your buddy Beard Grizzly. While I'm still in the middle of reading and writing down all of the new entries from Warmind, I wanted to take a small break and talk about a discussion topic that's been on my mind for a good while now. I'm not stating that I am right in my thoughts, and I would love to hear your own, but from the way that I see the raid in its entirety, now that we have it all with Warmind released, I am left to question how it helps the narrative of Destiny 2 as a whole. And by it, I mean the Leviathan and Calus. Note, I'm not talking about this from a gameplay or mechanics standpoint. I think from those standpoints the raid is fun and offers a good amount of challenge from what I've been able to play, and is more focused on getting the mechanics down than having to worry about keeping ogres in a place and then having to detonate things all at the same. Oh god, I am getting bad flashbacks here. Anyway, again, not what this is about. We're strictly talking about narrative. Calus as an individual character isn't really the problem. Calus seems like a pretty interesting character, and he's built up in a unique way compared to other raid bosses that we've encountered in the past. I guess save for Oryx and Axis, or at least Siva. Even then, we've seen Oryx and have fought him prior to the raid, and his introduction into the game was a lot more than, I'm gonna be over here eating this centaur planetoid because it looks vexilicious. The lack of interest that is shown by the Vanguard and Calus tomfoolery also doesn't help things. And having an invitation sent to our Guardian and perhaps a couple others to investigate this Leviathan makes me think there's a missing link somewhere here amongst our leadership. Added, no one seems to be interested in Benedict 9940, but that's a different topic, I suppose. All I'm saying is, you would figure that Ikora or Cade or someone would be interested in what's actually going on in the city, considering that that's kind of the point now of Destiny 2. Still, it's not even just his introduction, it's how the story with Calus seems to carry on. If we look into the stories of the Shadows, really any of them, we see that Calus is somewhat able to know how they're doing on Gaul's command ship, being able to tie back particular deaths and how they do die and so on. This could be due to some type of surveillance equipment on the Shadows themselves, but this should give you an idea of how Calus is able to see while even being on the Leviathan and be able to keep tabs on what's going on outside of the ship. One such example is Noor, being quoted as the last one to be killed after killing about 300 of Gaul's forces. Why does this matter? Well, as interested as he's become with our Guardian, he would have the ability to send out drones or otherwise to watch us and keep tabs on us. We see something similar with this with the crows of Prince Uldren. I can't imagine that in Calus' vast knowledge and ability, he wouldn't have something similar to allow for scouting our Guardian aside from just watching our escapades in the Leviathan. I mean, for crap's sake, how many robots are there of him underneath the undercroft of everything, underneath his actual, you know what I mean? He's got a lot of mechanics. Like, come on. Really, it almost seems like he's shoehorned into needing to keep us there for his own reasons, more than having a distinct reason to do so. You'd think this point wouldn't matter all that much, but it's at the heart of why the Leviathan is used so often within Destiny 2's raid mechanics, and it's all because Calus wants to see our Guardian do work in his name, and no one else. The book that came with the limited edition and above for Destiny 2 presents you with a series of individuals that Calus seeks to end. They have backstabbed him and sent him into space. The vast majority of these have either been killed off by the Shadows that Calus has hired, that's extreme air quotes by the by, or they're taken care of by our Guardian in instances of Consul and Gaul. I mean, Consul was killed off by Gaul, but you get my meaning. We're the ones highly responsible for taking out Calus' #1 hit list member. I know by the story mentions that this gives us access to the Leviathan and welcomed in, but this is a feat that none of his Shadows were able to carry out, and he promised them a lot of power for doing so. Additionally, the backdrop of the Leviathan is used for a place, not so much for the actual enemies that we face, say for the actual raid, not the lairs. The immediate raid is Calus and his loyalists. It makes sense. Most of the targets we kill, however, are in no way vastly important to the names we know of in either the book or within Calus' actual minions, and we're more battling circumstance than we are battling enemies. This obviously changes when we get to the Raid Lairs, but that's for down the line here. The immediate raid doesn't link to the main story of Destiny 2 very well. In fact, the new content of the second Raid Lairs seems more apt to what I would hope for and to see of a connection to the story. The last of the main Red Legion being taken care of and dropped out of our system. That would make sense, at least to me, and it would also fall in line with what we had in Destiny 1, where we killed the Heart of the Black Garden and then fight the Vex in the Vault of Glass. This connects back immediately to what we do within the story itself, and it makes a lot of sense. It also gives that feeling of continued need and structure within the actual story and narrative itself, by going and doing one thing against an opponent and then going and taking out the last shred or largest shred that might be more of a problem for us that we've needed to take care of. Vault of Glass again ensuing. Then I look to Curse of Osiris in Raid Lair number 1, where the main enemy we face is a Vex, thanks to the Leviathan chomping down on Nessus. Still, here we go, right back to the Leviathan in order to kill off this target that frankly has no consequence to us and is only really affecting Calus and his cabal. Meanwhile, we completely underuse the Infinite Forest within Curse of Osiris, and we end up pleasing his pudgy emperorship. I know the story behind the lair by the by, but it's just to stress a point here. Bear with me. After we get to Raid Lair 2 in Warmind, we're again heading back to the Leviathan, instead of using other areas around Mars, like, the vast caverns created further by Zol, or exploring another throne world like we did with Crota in the Dark Below. Now we're back to the Leviathan to take out the remainder of the Red Legion, which, again, should have probably been the focus of what we did in the first raid after everything was done, but I guess that's my headcanon. All the while, we're just here to please the Caligula wannabe, which we end up doing and making our power fully known to him in the last time for Year 1. The issue with Raid Lairs is twofold. Underutilization of a new area that's presented and built up within the main game and expansion, and being seemingly forced to cover topics in a particular manner while we fight for Calus, so to speak. It gives little change in how gear looks to boot, and when I dig into seeing how the environment somewhat changed from lair to lair, I wonder how much they're actually saving in development time for a new raid per expansion, again akin to something like Crota's End or otherwise. Let's get into that, however. Why would a new raid help versus simply having these lairs? To start off, perception is a big one, right? Bungie has been accused of being lazy and not building up new armor, weapon looks, or environments instead of going back to what has been used over and over before. Now, before I get on a rant about how a lot of games reuse assets and people need to get a reality check, the Raid Lairs are not helping this perception of reusing assets. They have some different story, voice lines, and showcase some other enemies to fight, but these enemies are native or born of other places in the story. It's almost like the Leviathan has turned into a smorgasbord of enemies, and it's the reason that we have to keep going back to fight those enemies out. I'd be more worried about those that could overtake the Leviathan and use it than I would be of Calus and the Leviathan itself. If we were able to get the Vanguard involved, I have this major feeling that we could just blow the thing up. Granted, that might be something similar to the Dreadnought blowing up our system if we happen to blow it up. Maybe. Yeah, well. Anyway, the idea is simpler than I'm making it out to be, I'm sure, but it's just to say that by sending us to the exact same spot to carry out an activity that has been laced back to story elements so far, and has been utilized to tell a story further, the lairs are not the best thing to take advantage of that. There are two contentions to this statement, of course, when dealing with the narrative of the expansions or main story. One main one is that we wouldn't have the Calus equipment and we wouldn't be as informed of the old-time Emperor. Another is that we wouldn't have a massive threat to our system to go after, and that Calus serves to allow for that. I don't contend with statement 2, as Calus does offer a fair threat, especially in instances of being able to move towards Earth and swallow it up with the Leviathan. But to think that he would be the only authority that would cause us great strain in the system, given the characters we've come across and come against in the story, Calus would not be my first pick. I mean, think back on the enemies that we've faced in expansions. They're not exactly insignificant characters. For starters, seeing Gaul turn into the Lightborn visage that he did, and then having him explode by the end of the campaign was probably the best way to have ended that story out. It matches what the character was after, and it falls in line with us entering into a new golden age and seeing a massive change within the system. The death of the console is the biggest issue to the main story, however, and that could have served as the means to carry on the Red Legion story into a raid, and that could have been left to gather the Red Legion into their final push and last chance to completely overtake us. Then again, that sounds familiar considering the contents of the third Raid Lair that I've seen so far, as it would mirror that sentiment, huh? Some may argue it would take away from the Cabal and not bring them to light all that often after the main campaign, but the same thing happened with the Vex after the main story in Destiny 1, and it took a good bit before we started to hear anything drastic about them again, minus those few pieces that would crop up from time to time. I'm harping on this point, but it's simply to show that other stations and ways existed to tie back within our system and give us different areas to visit outside of returning to the Leviathan. Again, a point I'm harping on. To the former point being made, however, how we wouldn't have that much information on Calus? Well, this ties back to a larger issue within the story and narrative that Destiny has been facing, like collectibles being laced and left around in raid areas. I don't think I have to call up more than the calcified fragments in the Books of Sorrow, and simply moving that system into the game would have allowed for the player to digest more about Calus, and it wouldn't require you to gather up different armor sets to get it. Both systems would be awesome to have, granted, and I do appreciate the stories we got about Calus and his other shadows that are employed, again heavy air quotes, but this is how we're able to see the insane nature of Calus and get further into his psyche. Add it, the areas that we visit in the main Leviathan are also gauche, lacking any kind of additional information to tell us about Calus. It's bad enough his favorite colors are white, gold, and purple, you know? Additionally, and the point I haven't made yet either, but when you introduce a character like Xol, a worm god of all things, and use him in a strike instance because you've shoehorned yourself into having Calus as the Raid Lair, well, that generally sparks a few questions about foresight and what you're intending on doing to play these characters up. By the end of the day, that's what matters to some, this perception of playing up a character and giving them the time they deserve. This Cabal Emperor that seems to want to keep secrets and claim that he has some awesome power but hasn't shown a lick of it yet, well, I question the direction that this takes, you know? Whole point of my argument here. Calus just doesn't garner 3 sets of raids. This is again not to say that Calus is a bad character. On the contrary, I think him pretty cool, and he has some interesting depth for being a new character. But that's the part that gets me. He's a new character in a universe of characters that already exist. I'll keep my imagination to myself, however, and my enjoyment of the raid isn't necessarily hindered by these notions, but it's simply to say that we could have done with better perception and build up those characters that have been shown to us already within this big universe. I don't expect every single raid boss to be an Axis or an Oryx, but setting up that level of connection is hard to shake off after a while, especially when Calus' story doesn't seem to be over just yet, which is both interesting and worrying at the same time. Anyway, I could carry this on for a lot longer than this, I'm sure, and I understand that the Raid Lairs are only a small part of the narrative issues that we do face within Destiny 2. The lack of collectibles and additional information given by them that we had in Destiny 1 really do play a large part in our understanding of the characters that we face in the game now. Hopefully this will change sooner rather than much later, or realistically be implemented retroactively, but I would simply hope that we could respect and see a respect of the characters that are presented within the game's universe. Anyway, per usual, the question now falls to you. Do you think I'm off my rocker? Am I onto something? Is there anything else that you would like to add or throw into the discussion? I'd love to hear it, and you know I'll give it a read down below in the comments. Otherwise, you know the buttons to press to tell me what you thought of this little opinion piece of mine. If you do subscribe, don't forget to hit the bell and check your settings for all your favorite creators. I'm going to get back to reading those entries now. I have about 25 more to go. It's taken me a lot longer than I thought. I'll see you next Spacetime Guardians. Take care.